The midday sun hung relentlessly over the dusty road that cut through the outskirts of the Boa Esperanza farm. It was an almost suffocating heat, typical of summer days, but Reynaldo Moreira was already used to it. At 48 years old, his sun-marked skin and calloused hands were silent witnesses to a lifetime dedicated to hard work in the fields. On his knees, he organized, with the care and patience of someone who knew that small details could make all the difference, his humble roadside fruit stand. The baskets were arranged with precision, filled with oranges, mangoes, and bananas, each fruit hand-picked, displaying vibrant colors that contrasted with the dry and dusty environment around it. For Reynaldo, this improvised stand was more than just a fruit stall. It was his last chance to maintain dignity amid a bleak economic scenario. The collapse of the Boa Esperanza farm, where he and many of his neighbors had worked for decades, had left everyone at the mercy of their own fate. Reynaldo felt the weight of failure as the months dragged on. The farm that had once supported so many families was now a symbol of decline. With the end of the wage system, he, like many others, was thrust into a new reality, surviving by selling what the land still provided, but on an individual and uncertain basis. Profit margins were small, customers were rare, and competition among the vendors on the roads was fierce. They all fought for the same goal: to get drivers to stop, even if only for a few minutes, to buy some fruit and thus ensure their daily sustenance. Every movement Reynaldo made as he adjusted the baskets was an attempt to attract the attention of the few cars that passed by. Sweat dripped down his forehead and mixed with the dust as he did his best to keep the fruit fresh and attractive. His body was exhausted, his legs ached, but giving up was not an option. He needed a good sale that day, and not just for basic sustenance. The roof of his house, which was practically falling apart, was a constant worry. With each storm, the fear that it would collapse grew, but without money, Reynaldo could not afford the repairs. His friend and neighbor, Cosme, often stopped by to help out in any way he could. Cosme was a man of few words, but he was impressively skilled with tools. He had promised Reynaldo that he would help fix the roof, but the problem was the materials. Cosme could not work without the boards, nails, and other necessary supplies, and Reynaldo knew that he would need to sell a lot of fruit to pay for it. On this particular day, he silently prayed for a small change of fortune, a customer who would make a difference, a sale that would bring in the money he so desperately needed. As the hours passed, discouragement began to set in. Cars passed at a steady pace, but no one stopped. Reynaldo saw, with a twinge of envy, that a few meters ahead other vendors seemed to attract more buyers, perhaps because their stalls were located in better spots on the road, where drivers could park more easily. He thought about how cruel life could be sometimes, how even a simple matter of positioning could determine the success or failure of a day's work. Then something different happened. The sound of a bus engine echoed along the road, and Reynaldo, who was already accustomed to seeing vehicles pass by without paying attention, was drawn to the unusual scene. The bus, old and a little rusty, stopped abruptly at the side of the road. Reynaldo raised his head, with the natural curiosity of someone who needs any sign of movement. A small group of passengers got out, and among them was a tired-looking young girl, no more than 12 or 13 years old. Her brown hair flowed as she ran after the bus, which was about to leave. The scene was heartbreaking. The girl gestured frantically, begging the driver to wait. But Reynaldo could hear the man's impatient tone even from a distance. He had already decided that he would not take her unless she had enough money for the fare, and he made that clear when he closed the door and started the bus. The young woman stood desolately in the middle of the road, her shoulders slumped and the expression on her face showing a mixture of despair and helplessness. Reynaldo watched from his booth, and something inside him stirred. He knew what it was like to feel helpless, alone in a world that seemed increasingly indifferent. His heart, already so accustomed to the harshness of life, was touched by that scene, and he felt an urgent need to act. Reynaldo hesitated for a moment, his mind still struggling with his own difficulties. He wasn't in an easy position either, but something about that young woman reminded him of himself when he was younger and faced his own challenges. It was then that, without much thought, he stood up and walked towards the girl. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft and full of concern. The young woman looked up, surprised that someone had cared enough to ask. Tears were already beginning to fill her eyes, but she struggled to answer. The emotion of it all seemed to suffocate her. Reynaldo, sensing her pain, quickly offered what he had, a package of fresh fruit that he had set aside for a sale that never happened. "Take this, it's not much, but it might help," he said, holding out the package. The girl looked at the fruit and then at Reynaldo, with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. No one had cared about her until that moment, and Reynaldo's gesture, as simple as it was, felt like a balm to her soul. Amidst her suppressed tears, the young woman began to tell her story. Her name was Viviane. She was far from home, struggling with relatives who were treating her badly, and all she wanted was to return to her hometown, to be with her father. However, with no money or support, she couldn't even call him. Her voice trembled as she spoke, and each word seemed to weigh more heavily on Reynaldo's heart. Without hesitation, Reynaldo reached into his pocket and pulled out the only bill he had, a modest 20 reais, but enough to pay for Viviane's ticket to the nearest city. He placed the money in the girl's hands, who looked at him in disbelief. "Go home," Reynaldo said with a gentle smile. "Stay safe." Viviane, moved beyond words, quickly hugged Reynaldo, as if that gesture were the only way to express her gratitude. Then she ran to catch the next bus, and Reynaldo stood there, watching her leave with a mixture of satisfaction and relief. That simple act of kindness had brought him an unexpected peace. The day was still hot and sales were still slow, but something had changed. Reynaldo felt that somehow everything would be okay. Little did he know that that simple gesture was about to trigger a transformation in his life, something that would take years to unfold, but that would show in surprising ways the power of small actions. 15 years had passed since that day on the road. Reynaldo, now 63, was sitting on the porch of his modest home, watching the end of another afternoon. The lines on his face, accentuated by time and hardship, told a story of constant struggle. Life had not been kind to him, and the challenges of surviving remained relentless. Boa Esperança Farm, which had once been his livelihood, was now under new management led by a man named Dr. Hugo, whose presence had brought more problems than solutions. Dr. Hugo was known for his coldness and disdain. Ever since he had taken over the management of the farm, he had made it clear that the years of service of men like Reynaldo were of no value to him. The farm, now focused on quick profits and with no regard for the well-being of the workers, was no longer the refuge many had hoped for. Reynaldo knew he was on the brink of a financial crisis, something that threatened not only his stability, but his very dignity. With his health already fragile, he feared the future and the imminent loss of everything he had worked for. One day, in a desperate attempt to find a solution, Reynaldo went to the farm office to speak with Dr. Hugo. The way there was familiar, but the feeling of desperation that accompanied him made everything heavier. He entered the humble office, his hands shaking and his heart heavy. The manager was sitting behind a desk covered in papers, with a distant look in his eyes, as if Reynaldo were just another minor problem on his to-do list. "Good morning, Dr. Hugo," Reynaldo began, his voice already thick with the weariness of someone who no longer knew how to ask for help. "I need to talk to you about my situation. Things have been difficult, and I was hoping there was something that could be done." Hugo looked up with a sneer, as if the conversation were a waste of time. He crossed his arms, leaning back in his chair with an arrogant expression. Reynaldo, always the same story, isn't it? What do you expect me to do for you? We're all struggling. The farm needs results, and your time here doesn't pay the bills." Hugo's words struck a blow to Reynaldo's heart. He hadn't expected a warm welcome, but the contempt and lack of empathy were like knives that cut deep. Reynaldo felt betrayed by his own story, as if his years of working on the farm had meant absolutely nothing. "So there's nothing you can do for me?" Reynaldo asked, his voice breaking as he tried to maintain his composure. Hugo shrugged, impassive. "If you want something, you'll have to find it yourself. We don't give anything away for free here." The humiliation was almost unbearable. With his head down and the weight of rejection on his shoulders, Reynaldo left the office without looking back. The feeling of abandonment, of being discarded after years of dedication, was overwhelming. Walking back home, his thoughts were a mixture of anger and sadness. How could life have become so unfair? What had he done to deserve so much suffering? When he arrived home, exhausted both physically and emotionally, he was surprised to see something unexpected. In front of his simple, worn-out house, a luxury car, a red Ferrari, was parked. The vehicle's gleaming shine contrasted sharply with the humble landscape around it. For a moment, Reynaldo thought he had come to the wrong address. But as he got closer, he noticed that two figures were waiting, one of them clearly familiar. The man next to the car, in an impeccable suit, was tall and elegant. But it was the woman next to him who made Reynaldo's heart stop for a moment. With a warm smile and a look of someone who recognized the place, she approached slowly. "Reynaldo Moreira?" the man asked, in a deep and polite voice. "Yes, it's me. Can I help you?" Reynaldo replied, still confused by the scene unfolding before him. The woman then took a step forward, her face now lit up with mutual recognition. "You don't remember me, do you?" she said in a soft but emotional voice. Reynaldo blinked a few times, trying to remember. The woman's face, now more mature and refined, seemed vaguely familiar to him, but he couldn't quite place it. It was then that she added, "It's me, Viviane, that girl you helped on the side of the road many years ago." The impact of her words was immediate. Reynaldo felt as if time had stopped for a moment. He remembered that day perfectly, how a desperate young woman had run after a bus, how he had given her 20 reais so she could go home. The memory of Viviane, still so young and vulnerable, now contrasted sharply with the confident and elegant woman who stood before him. "Viviane," he murmured, still in disbelief. You really came back." Viviane smiled, and her eyes filled with gratitude. "I never forgot what you did for me, Reynaldo. That simple act of kindness changed my life in ways you could never imagine. And I always promised myself that one day I would come back to thank you." Beside Viviane, the man introduced himself. "I'm Artur, Viviane's father. We're here because she told me about what you did for her back then. We couldn't let this opportunity pass us by." Reynaldo, still surprised and emotional, looked at Viviane and Artur, not knowing what to say. He had forgotten that day, or at least he hadn't expected something like that to come back to him. He felt embarrassed by the simplicity of his home and the conditions of his life, but Viviane, noticing this, immediately reassured him. "Reynaldo, you don't have to worry about anything. We're here to repay what you did for me, and not just with words. We want to help you in a meaningful way." With these words, Viviane and Artur smiled and explained the reason for their visit. They weren't there just to thank him, but to do something much bigger, to help Reynaldo rebuild his life. The kindness he had shown Viviane years ago had planted a seed, and now, that seed was blossoming in the form of gratitude and retribution. Reynaldo, still stunned by the situation, felt tears streaming down his face. The feeling of relief and surprise was indescribable. Life, which so often seemed unfair, had given him a second chance, in a way he could never have imagined. And that encounter, which began with a desperate young woman on the road, now marked the beginning of a new phase in his life, a phase in which kindness finally returned in the form of unexpected blessings. After the emotional reunion, Reynaldo found himself enveloped by a wave of emotions he had not felt in a long time. Viviane and Artur's visit brought back not only memories of a past he thought was behind him, but also the promise of a different future, something he no longer believed possible. However, when he realized that their intentions went far beyond simple thanks, Reynaldo was speechless. The surprise of discovering that they wanted not only to help him, but to offer him something concrete, began to take shape when Artur mentioned the idea of renovating his house. "Reynaldo, we know you've been through a lot over the years," Artur began, with a sincere look. "And that's exactly why we want to do something more. Your house. We'd like to completely renovate it, make it the way it deserves." Reynaldo stood there for a few moments, absorbing what he had just heard. His eyes passed over the worn walls of the house, the roof that threatened to fall in at any moment, and the yard, which had once flourished, now dry due to lack of care. The house had been his refuge for decades, but time and lack of resources had turned it into a decaying reminder of what it once was. Even so, he had never thought of asking for help. The idea of a renovation seemed like an unattainable luxury. I don't know what to say," Reynaldo stammered, still in disbelief. "I thank you from the bottom of my heart, but I can't accept something so big like that. This is too much." Viviane, with a comforting smile, gently touched Reynaldo's arm. "Reynaldo, you have no idea how much that act of kindness affected me. I wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for you. This renovation is not just a way to help you, it's also a way to show that the world can be a better place, thanks to people like you. Please let us do this." Reynaldo looked into Viviane's eyes and saw sincerity in every word. The weight of so many years of struggle and sacrifice seemed, at that moment, a little lighter. He took a deep breath, and with his voice choked with emotion, replied, "If you think you can, I accept. I don't know how to thank you, but I accept. The house needs more than ever a care that I could never give alone." From that moment on, Reynaldo's life began to change. Artur made some immediate calls, and within a matter of days, a team of specialized workers arrived at the house to assess the conditions and begin the renovation project. Reynaldo, who had never seen his house so full of activity, watched in amazement as every corner of the house was carefully analyzed. The engineer in charge of the project, Osvaldo Galvão, was an experienced man with a critical but kind eye. When he met Reynaldo, he reassured him, saying that the renovation would not only restore the structure of the house, but would also transform it into a new, safe, and comfortable space. Osvaldo explained that it would be necessary to replace the entire roof, strengthen the walls, renew the plumbing and electrical wiring, and paint and renovate the rooms that had been damaged by time. "Don't worry, Reynaldo," Osvaldo said with a smile. "We will do this with care and attention. When we are finished, your house will be different." And so the work began. Every day, Reynaldo woke up to the sound of saws and hammers echoing through the air. As he walked through the house, he watched the workers climbing and descending ladders, removing the rotten planks from the roof and replacing them with new, sturdy ones that gleamed in the sun. The walls were reinforced and coated with new layers of cement and paint, giving them new life. The rooms, which had been dark and dreary, began to receive natural light through the newly installed windows, and a sense of renewal took over the space. During the construction, Viviane and Artur visited frequently. They wanted to closely monitor the progress and ensure that everything was being done with the utmost care. On each visit, Reynaldo was deeply touched by the attention and affection that both showed. Viviane, in particular, was always bringing personal details to the house. One time she brought some plants for the garden, saying that she wanted the yard to flourish again, just like Reynaldo's life. On another visit, she showed up with new curtains for the windows, which she had personally chosen. With each passing day, Reynaldo felt more grateful. He watched the transformation process with admiration, but what impressed him most were not the physical changes in the house. What touched his heart most was the constant presence of Viviane and Artur. The feeling of being seen, cared for, and valued was something he had not experienced in a long time. The feeling of isolation that had accompanied him had begun to dissipate. As the renovation neared its end, the house was no longer the same. The structure that had once threatened to collapse was now solid, safe, and renewed. The walls, which had been bearing years of wear and tear, shone with new colors, giving Reynaldo's home a lightness and joy that he had not felt since the first days he lived there. The roof, finally repaired, seemed to symbolize everything that had been rebuilt in his life. The change was not just physical. Reynaldo began to realize that the renovation of the house was, in a way, a metaphor for his own transformation. Just like his house, he too was undergoing an internal renewal. The loneliness that had consumed him in recent years was being replaced by a sense of connection and belonging. And this connection was not limited to Viviane and Arthur, but extended to everyone around him, including the workers who came to his house every day and with whom he exchanged stories and laughs. When the work was finally completed, Reynaldo could hardly believe his eyes. His house was unrecognizable. Every corner seemed to have been touched by the careful hand of someone who wanted to see not just a renovated building, but a renewed life. The garden, which had previously been just an empty, dry space, was now flourishing with the plants that Viviane had brought, and the new balcony with its comfortable chairs seemed to invite Reynaldo to sit and reflect on how much his life had changed. The day that Viviane and Arthur came to see the final result, Reynaldo felt that, finally, everything made sense. They were all together in the new living room, talking and laughing, and the feeling that life, despite all its difficulties, could still offer something beautiful, filled Reynaldo's heart. The look of gratitude in his eyes, although silent, said it all. "I will never be able to thank you enough for what you have done for me," Reynaldo said, moved. Viviane smiled. "You already thanked us many years ago, Reynaldo, when you gave me the chance to change my life. Now, it is just our turn to do the same for you." With the house transformed and his life renewed, Reynaldo knew that this was not just a physical renovation. It was a new page in his story, one that he never expected to write, but that, with the kindness and generosity of Viviane and Arthur, was finally beginning to be told. The story of Reynaldo Moreira and Viviane Boa Esperança is a clear example of how kindness, even in its simplest and most unpretentious forms, can echo through time, creating profound and unexpected impacts. Reynaldo's gesture of giving 20 reais to a hungry girl on the side of the road seemed like a small act at the time. He had no idea that this simple act of generosity would be the catalyst for such a big change, not only in the young girl's life, but in his own. Reynaldo had helped Viviane at a time when she was completely helpless, not knowing who to turn to. He asked for nothing in return. He did not expect that the money would come back to him, much less that it would come back to him in such a grand way, years later. His motivation was pure. He saw a person in need and, even though he had his own difficulties, he offered what he could. Perhaps it was precisely the simplicity of this act that made it so powerful. The power of kindness lies in its ability to create connections between people. In Reynaldo's case, this small gesture created an invisible bridge between him and Viviane, a young woman who, without knowing it, would carry that act with her for the rest of her life. And this bridge was not made of obligations or expectations, but of genuine gratitude. Over the years, Viviane grew up to become a successful businesswoman, but she never forgot the man who, in a moment of despair, reached out to her. That simple gesture was like an anchor that kept her connected to a memory of solidarity and empathy. The impact of Reynaldo's kindness unfolded in ways he could never have anticipated. Little did he know that by helping Viviane, he was planting a seed that would sprout years later in the form of retribution on a scale he could never have dreamed of. Viviane, in turn, was so deeply touched by that gesture that, even after all these years, she felt the need to return the kindness she had received. The cycle of generosity that began on the side of the road blossomed into a complete renewal of Reynaldo's life. That is one of the greatest lessons of this story. Genuine kindness is timeless. An act of kindness, no matter how small, can ripple and grow in unimaginable ways. It can create ripples of impact, affecting people in ways that are not immediately visible. At that moment, by giving Viviane the money, Reynaldo did not know that he was transforming his own life as well as hers. The simple act of reaching out to someone in need may seem insignificant, but its resonance can span decades. Another powerful point in this story is how Reynaldo's kindness transcended the immediate circumstances of his own life. He was a man who, at that moment, was already facing his own challenges. His life was not easy, he was struggling to survive, and yet he chose to help someone who needed it even more. This shows us that generosity is not something that is measured by the amount of resources we have, but by the willingness to share what we have, even if it is little. Reynaldo was not rich, but he was generous, and that made all the difference. Furthermore, the emotional impact of this gesture on Viviane's life is undeniable. When someone helped her in a moment of despair, she found not only a solution to her immediate problem, but also an example of humanity that left a deep impression on her. This kind of experience can shape the way a person sees the world and the way they choose to act in the future. Viviane, now a successful woman, carried this experience with her, and it motivated her to give back when she had the opportunity. Kindness also has a transformative power. In Reynaldo's case, it was not only his home that changed, but his very perspective on life. He, who had already lost hope in many aspects, saw his life gain a new color, a new opportunity to start over. Viviane and Arthur's generosity, motivated by Reynaldo's past gesture of kindness, was not just a material return. It was a reminder that life can still surprise, that seeds planted in times of difficulty can blossom in times of abundance. The emotional impact of this transformation was profound for Reynaldo. The weight of the hardships he was carrying seemed lighter with each passing day as he renovated his home. More than that, the simple fact of knowing that someone cared about him, that they saw him as someone worthy of being helped and reciprocated, gave him a new sense of belonging and value. Viviane and Arthur's act of kindness restored more than just Reynaldo's physical home. It restored his dignity, his faith in humanity, and his ability to believe that the future could be better. And that is the transformative power of kindness. It not only improves the life of the one who receives it, but also that of the one who gives it. Viviane and Arthur, when they reciprocated Reynaldo's generosity, experienced the joy of seeing how their gesture made a difference in his life. Reynaldo, in turn, saw his life transformed by the kindness he had sown years earlier, living proof that the good we do, sooner or later, returns to us. Reynaldo and Viviane's story is also a powerful reminder to all of us about the importance of practicing kindness in our own lives. We never know the impact our actions can have on someone else's life. Sometimes, a small act of generosity, which seems insignificant at the time, can be the spark that lights a flame of hope in someone's heart. And that flame, over time, can grow and illuminate not only that person's life, but ours as well. Ultimately, what Reynaldo and Viviane's story teaches us is that kindness creates powerful connections that transcend time, circumstances, and even the barriers that life imposes on us. It has the power to transform lives, restore faith, and remind us that in a world often marked by indifference, there are still acts of kindness that make all the difference. And that, in the end, we are all part of a cycle of generosity, where what we give to the world, in one way or another, always comes back to us. Thus, the impact of Reynaldo's kindness went far beyond what he could have imagined, proving that what we sow in times of need can return in abundance, in times we never expected. Reynaldo and Viviane's story addresses a series of social and emotional themes that are deeply relevant to today's society. First, we see how social inequality is a determining factor in Reynaldo's life. He represents the reality of many people who, after years of hard work, face financial difficulties and struggle to survive in a world that seems to forget the most vulnerable. His life on the side of the road, selling fruit to survive, is a reflection of the economic hardships faced by many rural workers, who see their sources of income disappear in the face of economic crises and changes in the rural landscape. On the other hand, Viviane, who also lived in difficult situations when she was young, ends up rising socially, showing that with support and opportunities, it is possible to overcome adverse circumstances. However, what unites these two distinct realities is solidarity. Reynaldo, despite his own struggles, was able to help someone who was in an even more desperate position, and this simple yet powerful gesture was what changed everything. The story teaches us that no matter what situation we find ourselves in, there is always room for empathy and generosity. Reynaldo and Viviane's story offers several powerful life lessons, showing how kindness, generosity, and gratitude can shape a person's destiny. One of the main lessons is that small acts of kindness can create big changes. Reynaldo's gesture of helping Viviane with a modest amount of money seemed insignificant to him at the time, but it had a profound and lasting impact on her life. This lesson reminds us that even the smallest acts of kindness can create ripples of meaningful change in the lives of others. Another important lesson that emerges from this narrative is that of generosity in times of hardship. Reynaldo, despite facing his own financial and emotional struggles, was able to look beyond his own problems and offer help to someone who was in an even more difficult situation. This behavior teaches us that true generosity does not depend on having a lot, but rather on the willingness to share the little we have, especially when we know it can make a crucial difference to someone else. Gratitude is also a central theme in the life lessons conveyed by the story. Viviane never forgot what Reynaldo did for her. Years later, she still felt deeply grateful, and her desire to give back was what fueled her return to his life. The story teaches us that gratitude is a powerful force that can motivate us to act on behalf of others, especially when we feel that we have been helped in critical times. Furthermore, the story of Reynaldo and Viviane shows us the importance of resilience. Both characters faced great challenges in their lives, but neither of them gave up. Reynaldo continued his daily struggle, even when circumstances seemed hopeless, and Viviane, after going through personal difficulties, moved forward and became a successful woman. The lesson here is clear. Perseverance and resilience in the face of adversity can lead us to new paths and opportunities that we never imagined. Finally, the story offers us a reflection on the cycle of kindness. By reciprocating the generosity she received, Viviane demonstrates that kindness is something that can be multiplied. What began as a simple gesture of help became something much bigger, which not only changed Reynaldo's life, but also reinforced the value of empathy and solidarity in the lives of everyone involved. This reminds us that, when we help someone, we are also planting seeds that can blossom in surprising ways in the future. These lessons invite us to reflect on what really matters in our lives and how we can, through acts of kindness and empathy, create a positive impact on the world around us. The story of Reynaldo and Viviane invites us to reflect deeply on the impact of our actions and the power of generosity in our lives. Throughout his journey, Reynaldo demonstrated that, even in the midst of adversity, it is possible to lend a helping hand to others without expecting anything in return. This simple gesture of help, which could have gone unnoticed, ended up shaping the destiny of not only Viviane, but Reynaldo himself. What can we learn from this? The story makes us think about how each act of kindness can be a seed planted. Sometimes we do not see the immediate results of our actions, and this can discourage us from continuing to do good. However, this narrative teaches us that our attitudes, no matter how small they may seem, can generate a profound and transformative impact over time. As Viviane demonstrates when she returns years later to return the favor, gratitude has the power to generate a virtuous cycle of generosity. This reflection leads us to question our own lives. How many times have we failed to help someone because we think that what we have to offer is little? Reynaldo, despite financial difficulties, decided to help. And this decision not only changed Viviane's life, but also his own. This is a powerful message about the importance of acting with empathy and altruism, regardless of the circumstances. Another interesting point of discussion is the theme of gratitude. Viviane never forgot what Reynaldo did for her. This leads us to think about how we deal with the acts of kindness we receive throughout our lives. How can we reciprocate these actions? Gratitude, in Viviane's case, was not just an internal feeling, but manifested itself in a concrete action that transformed Reynaldo's life. This makes us reflect. How can we express our gratitude in a meaningful way? The story of Reynaldo and Viviane is, at its core, an inspiring message about the transformative power of kindness, gratitude, and solidarity. By following the journey of these two characters, we see that small acts of generosity can have consequences far beyond what we imagine. Reynaldo's simple gesture of giving 20 rays to Viviane in a time of need changed the course of their lives in unexpected and momentous ways. Throughout this journey, we are reminded that kindness is never wasted. Even if the results are not immediate, it has the power to create invisible bonds that can resurface over time, manifesting themselves in the most surprising ways. Reynaldo, without expecting anything in return, acted with his heart, and years later, this act of compassion was reciprocated in a way he could never have anticipated. History teaches us that the return of kindness may come slowly, but when it does, it is capable of transforming realities. Another important aspect is the relevance of gratitude. Viviane never forgot what Reynaldo did for her, and her desire to give back shows how genuine gratitude not only strengthens human bonds, but also promotes positive actions that can benefit others in a tangible way. Her gratitude led to the renovation of Reynaldo's house, and more than that, it brought new hope to his life. The central message of this story is clear. Even in the most difficult times, there is always the opportunity to make a difference in someone's life. Reynaldo was in a precarious situation, but he still chose to be generous. This choice not only impacted Viviane's life, but also his own. This cycle of kindness and gratitude reminds us that the true force for change in the world lies in the connections we form and the actions we take toward one another. As we reflect on this story, we are encouraged to think about how we can incorporate these principles into our own lives. How can we be more generous even when we face challenges? How can we practice gratitude in a sincere and meaningful way? Reynaldo and Viviane's story invites us to be agents of change, even if it means taking a small step toward others. Thus, as the story concludes, it becomes clear that kindness, generosity, and gratitude are powerful forces that can shape destinies. They have the power to transform lives, to build new opportunities, and to create connections that last through time. In the end, we are reminded that in a world often marked by challenges and inequalities, kindness can be the spark that ignites hope, both in our own lives and in the lives of others. And so ends this moving story, leaving us with the certainty that an act of kindness is never forgotten. It resurfaces sooner or later to touch and transform those who once practiced it. May we then be sources of kindness and gratitude in the world, because we never know how these gestures may come back to us in surprising and enriching ways.